Camus and Miklotov, the captains of Matilda's Red and Blue Knights. While these two fan favourites had a decent amount of screen time during Suikoden 2, they received very little in the way of backstory beyond what was revealed in Richmond's investigations. However, the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 3, a book that released 3.5 years after the game, contained a short story titled Emblem of the Oath, which focused on Camus and Miklotov during a border dispute with the Highland Kingdom. The story takes place an unknown number of years before the events of Suikoden 2 in a village between a forest and a river along the Matilda Highland border. A platoon of Blue Knights were stationed in a small fort that was built into the cliff right behind the village to protect the border. It appears that this fort was the cause of the endless disputes around the village. The story begins when the village is occupied by Highland. The son of the village chief fled the village and rushed to Rockak's castle to inform the knights of what happened and to plead with them to save his father. Gordeau, the commander of the White Knights, ordered a force to assemble to march on the village and kill the Highlanders, but Miklotov, knowing the brutal tactics that Gordeau would employ, rushed out of the castle in a rage and headed for the stables. Miklotov hopped on his horse and rode for the village with Camus chasing after him. The two rode through a storm all day until they reached the village that night. Wondering how they were going to infiltrate the village, they removed their knight uniforms, hiding them in their saddlebags. They then approached the Highland gatekeeper, claiming to be messengers sent from the main unit to check on the village chieftain. Camus reached into his pocket and presented a forged letter he had taken with him from Rockak's. The guards sent word ahead to the fort that messengers had arrived and let them inside, but informed them it would be disrespectful to speak with the captain in their current state, instructing them to visit Anastasia at the stables for some dry clothes. Anastasia was an elderly lady who worked at the stables, and meeting with her, the two continued with their ruse that they were messengers sent from Lorenwi. Anastasia threw them a dry set of clothes each, and as they were getting changed, she pulled their knight uniforms out of their saddlebags, asking if she could throw them away. Unable to keep up the ruse any longer, Camus apologized and revealed the truth, asking for her assistance in rescuing the villagers. Anastasia's voice changed, showing nothing but disdain for the Matilda Knights. She revealed how the village becomes worse every single time it's captured, and ever since Gordeau came to power, things have gotten even worse. This village has changed hands so frequently that many of its inhabitants held great resentment for the Matilda Knightdom, whose knights have no regard for the loss of life or the damage they caused the village when fighting to reclaim it, merely fighting to redeem their honour by defeating their enemy. Miklotov was shocked to see the hatred she held for the Matilda Knights, as he expected the villagers to be waiting impatiently, eagerly ready to assist in their rescue. Anastasia then tells them a story of a time long before Genkaku, before they were even born, when the knights withdrew from the village without even putting up a fight, all except for a single knight who remained behind to protect the villagers. The villagers took up arms to fight alongside the knight, but the village was quickly overrun by the Highland army. The Highlanders threatened to execute every villager who resisted them, but the knight surrendered himself in exchange for sparing the lives of the villagers. Rather than executing the knight, the Highland soldiers chose to humiliate him by cutting off his dominant arm, ensuring he could never fight again. Anastasia then asked Camus and Miklotov, "Is there even one such knight among you now?" Camus and Miklotov then think of the force that's on the march that Gordeau had assembled, knowing their actions would prove Anastasia right, that they didn't care for the safety of the villagers. Camus then swore on their honour as knights that they rode without permission to rescue the villagers. Miklotov spoke of the one-armed knight, telling Anastasia that he heard stories of that knight as a child, stories which inspired him to follow the same path and become a knight. A soldier approached the stables, informing the two that they've been summoned by the captain. As they approached the fort, they found a man standing by the door waiting for them. He introduced himself as Rigel, the captain of the unit stationed in the village. Rigel asked Camus to hand him the letter addressed to him, to which Camus obliged while explaining that they'd been sent to speak to the village chieftain. "I see," replied an uneasy Rigel, who saw right through their ruse. Rigel then invited Camus and Miklotov inside the fort and told them of how bored he's been working in the countryside. As Rigel escorted the duo through the fort, they scanned the inside, realizing very few areas were lit and that the Highland forces were smaller in number than they thought. As they walked through the fort, they spotted several drunk men, one of whom greeted Rigel by raising a bottle and asking him, "How's it going, boss?" This took Camus and Miklotov by surprise. This kind of behaviour wouldn't be tolerated in the knightdom, and they can't imagine it would be tolerated in Highland. Rigel then reveals that they're a mercenary unit that were hired by Highland to capture the village. Rigel then continues to play along with their ruse, asking if they're running errands from Lorenwy. He then comments about this being the time of year that rowan trees are in full bloom, and asks Camus how are the rowan trees in front of the palace. Camus falls for the bait and replies, "They're starting to look more colourful." Rigel then guides Camus and Miklotov to the room that Kelson, the village chief, is waiting in and introduces them to Kelson. Kelson revealed that his son ran away, mistakenly believing that he had been taken prisoner, but the truth was that he surrendered the village to Highland. Kelson told them a similar story to Anastasia, how the villagers are sick and tired of their treatment at the hands of the Matilda Knightdom. Rigel then chimed in, informing Camus that there are no rowan trees in front of the palace in Lorenwy. Rigel showed no signs of aggression, remaining as calm as ever and not even calling for his men. Camus asked Rigel why he led them here if he knew their identity. Rigel responded that he wanted them to see for themselves how disliked they are in their own land and that the villagers prefer their treatment under Highland. Rigel then asked Camus and Miklotov to quit the Matilda Knights and join his mercenary unit. The mere suggestion insulted and angered Miklotov, who outright refused Rigel's offer. Camus then spotted a light swaying in the distance outside the window. Miklotov and Rigel soon set their gaze out the window as more and more lights began to appear in the forest. Gordeau's men had arrived and circled the village, lighting flaming arrows and unleashing a volley on the village. As the village caught fire and burned around them, Rigel shouted in disgust, "Is this your pride as a knight?" Camus then grabbed Kelson, leading him out of the room to help him find the villagers to lead them to safety. Miklotov then drew his sword and stood between Rigel and the door. The village was in chaos, villagers screaming in a panic as their homes burned, while the Matilda Knights clashed with the Highland mercenaries. Back inside the fort, Miklotov and Rigel clashed. I'm not going to go into detail on this fight. This short story is around 25 pages long, and this sword fight between the two went on for 5 pages. It's too much. I'll sum it up by saying that the two were evenly matched. Rigel proved to be every bit as capable as Miklotov, and they read each other's moves like a book. Back outside in the village, Camus spotted his and Miklotov's horses near an area the fire had not yet reached. He then heard the whine of a horse coming from the nearby stables, and saw the shadow of a person moving inside. Camus rushed into the stable while Kelson went to guide the villagers to safety. Camus found Anastasia inside the stables, risking her life to save the horses. As the last horse fled, she remained inside reaching for something. Camus called out to her, and as she turned around to leave, the roof collapsed on top of her, trapping her from the waist down under a wooden beam and a pile of rubble which inflicted her with a grave wound. Camus attempted to lift the wooden beam to free her, but was unable to do so. As he struggled to free her, the rage rune on his right hand shone bright, and a blast unleashed from his rune extinguished the flames in the stable. Back inside the fort, Miklotov and Rigel's duel had finally come to an end. Miklotov managed to disarm Rigel, knocking his sword from his hands and pressing the tip of his sword against Rigel's throat. But as Rigel's sword was being knocked from his hands, he pressed a dagger against Miklotov's stomach. The two exchanged words as they were locked in a stalemate. Rigel told Miklotov to think about why the villagers no longer believed in the knights and why they were so ready to switch sides. He then told Miklotov to rethink his blind loyalty to the knights and to think for himself. Just then, they saw a flash of light from outside the window. Realizing it was Camus, the two released their blades, commenting to each other that it was a fun fight. It appears that Rigel had developed some amount of respect for Camus and Miklotov, as he told Miklotov where the Blue Knights who were stationed in the fort were being kept, allowing Miklotov to rescue them and preventing them from dying in the flames. Rigel then rounded up his men and left the village, reasoning that they were only paid to capture the village, not to defend it. Miklotov then rushed outside to find Camus kneeling by Anastasia's body. Miklotov knelt beside Anastasia, who handed him an apron tied up in a knot. He untied the knot, finding his and Camus's knight uniforms wrapped inside. Anastasia had remained in the stables after freeing the last of the horses to save their uniforms, knowing how important the uniforms were to them. She then took Camus's hand, stating that she has no regrets, and with her final breaths, she whispered to Camus and Miklotov that they are the hope of the people, as she passed away with her faith in the knights restored. I don't know about that, Anastasia. The actions of two knights doing a good deed isn't going to restore my faith in their order when the rest of them are currently burning my town to the ground, which led to my excruciatingly painful death from being trapped under flaming rubble and impaled. I'd be cursing them till my final breath and wishing a pox upon all of their families. Anyway, that's it for Camus and Miklotov's backstory. As I mentioned at the beginning, this backstory came from a short story titled Emblem of the Oath from the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 3 that released in Japan in 2001. As always, do keep in mind that the games, the manga, the novels, the short stories, the anime, and everything else are all separate entities that are written by different authors. The backstory told in this short story is technically not canon to the game, but unless these two characters make another appearance in a future game and that game contradicts the information in this short story, we can treat this as their canon backstory. If you like these shorter stripped down videos covering topics which very little lore exists on, let me know in the comments and I'll make more of them. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.